Hello everyone and welcome to us here from the British Dyslexia Association as we join together some very eminent experts from some very important organisations within the dyslexia community to talk about this key issue about the teaching of reading. And it's such a privilege to have some of these experts with us today. I'm going to do a quick introduction to them all, but as the chat progresses, I'm sure you'll get to know them in terms of their expertise. So we start with British Dyslexia Association's Chief Executive Officer, Gillian Ashley. And then we've got Lynn Greenwald, who's CEO of Patos and has been since 1995 and was awarded the OBE for her services to special educational needs. So welcome, Lynn. We've then got Chris Rossiter, who's Chief Executive of the Driver Trust. Welcome, Chris. We have Dr. Anna Smith, who's Head of Education, Training and Dyslexia Guild at Dyslexia Action. Welcome, Anna. Tori Sparks, who's Head of Projects at Helen Arkell. Welcome, Tori. And we have Caroline Reid, who's a Senior Course Tutor at Communicate Ed and spent 20 years as a Senior Teacher Advisor for her local authority. So all our guests today are eminently qualified to talk us through some of the key issues that we now face regarding the changes to how we consider teaching our children to read. So I'd like to start with Gillian, if that's okay with you, Gillian, just to set the scene on why this is such an important issue and why BDA felt the need to put together a petition to make some of the changes that we are really passionate about.
Thank you, Donna. Thank you everyone for joining us today in raising awareness about concerns on the government's guidance published in July 2021 for teaching reading. And it is so important that we get teaching reading right. The notion that teachers should adhere to just one method, for example, we're talking today about systematic synthetic phonics, which is such a mouthful, I'm going to refer to SSP for this podcast. But we're talking about that because the government advocating that that is the sole method for teaching reading. And that has led us to consult with leading academics in our field and to raise the issue at our all-party parliamentary group event in September 2021, which was really well received. We've got research spanning 35 years that we've obtained confirming that when SSP is used as the only method of teaching reading, it does not work for up to 25% of our children, particularly those with dyslexia. Dyslexic children and others with reading difficulties cannot learn to read just by learning phonics. They need explicit teaching and benefit when a range of approaches to teaching reading are used alongside phonics. So we wrote a letter of concern to Nick Gibb, Minister of State at the Department for Education, but as this brought no hope for us of a turnabout, we've had no alternative but to raise a petition to gather concern about the sole use of SSP. So what are we asking the government to do? We are asking them to support teachers to teach a structured, cumulative and multisensory approach and a range of strategies alongside phonics instruction. We know that SSP is a highly developed way to teach reading and a critically important part of the beginning reading programme, but we also know that it's got its limitations and it should not be the sole method of teaching reading. So we're asking for SSP instruction to be integrated into broader reading schemes rather than used as the only method. We know that English is a difficult language to learn because it doesn't have a clear sound to letter correspondence. So many words are not pronounced as they are spelt. Poor reading prevents our children from accessing the school curriculum, and we know that that has a lifelong impact, significantly narrowing future work and life choices. Children with reading difficulties need explicit teaching, and we know that they benefit when a range of approaches to teaching reading are used alongside synthetic phonics. So that's what we're asking, and that's why this morning is so crucial.
Brilliant. Thank you, Gillian. And it really brings home why this is an important issue. I wonder if any of our experts, just for those who are listening who might be unsure, in very, kind of nice and clear terms, what is this systematic synthetic phonics, this SSP? And it is a mouthful. What is SSP? Anyone like to just say in a nutshell, if at all possible?
I'll have a go
Thank
for
you,
you.
Lynn.
Okay. So systematic synthetic phonics. So it does describe in its name some of what they're trying to do. It is a systematic approach which breaks down the sounds. That first teaches the letter sounds and then builds up to blending these sounds to be able to read words. And it has to be done stage by stage in a systematic approach. And it's about synthesizing these sounds together. So I think that takes care of all of its descriptive terms.
Brilliant.
And it's
Thank
been
you.
very successful in schools to start people on that reading journey. But we have
Brilliant.
issues, as Gillian has pointed to.
Yeah, thanks, Lynn. Anything else experts want to add, or do we think Lynn's captured it in a nutshell there? We okay? I can see nods. Let's go on then. So, based on what Gillian said, and Lynn's just done a brilliant job of explaining what this thing called SSP is, why is it important then that we address this issue? So essentially, BDA have put together a petition. Why are we trying to encourage people to sign it and so on? If we can come to each expert in turn then. So Chris, may I start with you in terms of why is this issue so important and people should be encouraged to sign the petition?
Thanks, Donna. Yeah, I think this is important because we know that literacy is so much broader than phonics. We know that children will struggle with all forms of literacy right the way through their education. And so I think that there's an issue around the fact that SSP at least is taught in year one in preparation for the phonics check, although that's also followed up in year two where children don't meet the expected standard. But if children don't secure phonics at that stage, what happens afterwards? So what happens in years 3 and 4 and 5 and beyond? And where a child has not secured that understanding, those difficulties are going to continue. So we need to continue the journey for all types of literacy right the way through education, rather than assuming that children have acquired some sort of or have reached some sort of expectation at any particular stage. But we also need to consider the broader aspects of literacy, so not just the decoding, but the comprehension, the inference, and of course the writing and the language aspects that back those up. Again, making sure that we address those at every point in education, right across the key stages and the different subjects, and that we have a much more holistic view of literacy than just simply focused on decoding.
Brilliant, thank you. Tori, so our colleagues at Helen Arkell, why do you guys think this is an important issue? And I know you've supported us in encouraging people to sign the petition.
Absolutely, we have. I think it's really important for parents and the wider public to realise about the UK's teaching of reading, because so much is ignored as far as the development of a child is concerned. So it's not just about an SSP approach. As Chris says, it's so much more in terms of bringing in context and vocabulary and grammar and bringing all these skills together, but underpinned by a very strong training in phonological awareness, our awareness of sounds. And as we know, that's a sort of key weakness in children with dyslexia. So just for people to realise that if we focus on this very binary approach to teaching reading, we're going to be putting everyone at a disadvantage, not just children with dyslexia. And so, yes, we need a multi-sensory cumulative approach, but not just focusing on phonics, focusing on the development of language, the awareness of language, bringing in a knowledge of the orthography, spelling patterns, because it's not just about reading and develop together. And with the work that we do at the charity, which is very similar to yourselves, it's supporting children to develop those literacy skills, which are life skills, aren't they? So if you don't develop those life skills, you're putting our younger society at a huge disadvantage.
Brilliant, thanks, Tori. And Caroline, our colleagues at Communicate Ed, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this issue.
Thank you. Yes, we focus on training and exam access arrangements, and we often see students, obviously, once they get to either year 6 or once they get to GCSE and A level, who are still struggling to read because they've never been able to learn to read properly in the first place. Very often that's because of a learning difficulty, perhaps dyslexia. Sometimes it's just that they've missed out in the early years, perhaps had not good teaching or have been absent from school. As a specialist teacher, having worked for, as was said earlier, I worked for many years for my local authority as a teacher advisor, and have probably taught hundreds of students who failed to learn to read with the straightforward systems to learn to read. And I would make a case for sight vocabulary being absolutely essential. As some of my colleagues have mentioned, there's lots of other skills that we want to develop in our readers. But for me, the key is a sight vocabulary. There are so many words that aren't regular. There's no clear sound to letter correspondence in English in many cases. So many words are not phonically regular, so they can't be found with phonics alone. You just need to be able to recognise those words. And there's various lists around of the first 100 or 200 keywords. And for any student, whether they're dyslexic or not, they just have to learn those words that are so common. In any page that you find in English, there'll be many words that are not phonically regular, and our students just need to know those by sight. There's no other way of learning them, and if they haven't got a good basic sight vocabulary, no amount of phonics will make up for that.
Thanks, Caroline. Really interesting. And Anna, at Dyslexia Action, what are you guys thinking at the moment around these key issues as well? Really interested in your thoughts on that.
I would like to follow up what everybody said, which I think makes a lot of sense, and just add that at Dyslexia Action, lots of our teaching programs, we've always seen these different angles as so important for teachers to use as in their toolkits. And I'm just thinking about things like morphology, and morphology could be such a wonderful way for kids to understand how words work, particularly with the English language, which is so difficult to grasp superficially. But if a child is interested in how that word has been created and how it's constructed, I think that could just bring language alive for children where previously they couldn't access it. And there's some really lovely research by Jeff Bowers and his brother, who and lots of the stuff that they do is on YouTube, and it's really inspiring because you can see kids getting really excited about language. And I think it works for children with dyslexia, and it also works for children who are learning normally. I think there's lots of ways that we can make language and literacy accessible for kids.
Brilliant. Thanks, Anna. And last and certainly not least, Lynn, for our colleagues at PATOS, what are you guys thinking about this important issue?
Well, it's absolutely vital that all of these things that my colleagues and friends have spoken about before are included in the approach to supporting young people to develop their literacy skills and to try to develop some fluency. We have far too many young people who are leaving even primary school unable to read well enough to access the secondary curriculum. And I also endorse even greatly the approach that Anna is saying about implementing morphology so that young people can understand the structure of words and build those up. That makes it much less of a mystery when they're trying to decipher reading and improve their comprehension. So there does have to be this range, and our specialist teachers understand well how to work with young people to find the right ways in and how to evaluate just what has been effective and to build on that and to try new avenues if what they have put in place isn't as effective as they would like it to be. And interestingly, Dr. Bowers is going to be a speaker at our PATOS annual conference this year in the spring.
Brilliant. Sounds amazing. So thank you, experts. The idea then the importance of the work that we're doing and trying to highlight. I suppose you've really done a great job there at really bringing that home to us. So I'm going to play devil's advocate now, and I'm going to ask then, what happens if we don't achieve what we want and we don't work in the ways that you guys are discussing? As Lynn's just talked about with mystery, is the mystery of reading going to continue then for some of our learners? So if we ignore those with dyslexia in our teaching and learning journey, what could happen to those individuals? Gillian, may I start with you on that, in terms of if we don't make these changes that we need to?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that we are really doing a disservice to our young people if we don't address things differently. But also, we are not empowering our teachers to do a what next approach, because when you visit primary schools, they very often don't know what to do outside of synthetic phonics. They are struggling themselves to know, what do we do for children who haven't learnt to read, because their toolbox only contains SSP. So when they've used that up, is it teaching the child the same thing again? And we know that that doesn't work. So we're not empowering teachers because we're not giving them the right skill sets to teach wider than SSP, and to also be able to just identify what isn't working for that child, and therefore what is the thing that they're going to need next. They don't know what to do very often, and teachers are fantastic and want to know. And that's the thing that I really want to shout out about. They do want to know other ways, and we're not giving them that toolkit that they need.
Thanks, Gillian. Tori, may I come to you on that one then? So, what happens if we don't get it right for our learners in these ways?
I mean, looking at it in a very cutthroat way, it will affect our economy, won't it? Because we're not investing and training our teachers correctly, and then the children aren't able to access the learning in the right way, which is, as we keep saying, a multisensory, cumulative, varied approach. We're going to do our young people, as Gillian says, a huge disservice. And as Linus says, I mean, one thing that I think we're all aware of in terms of specialist teaching is that the rate of the curriculum is very fast as well. So using this systematic synthetic phonic approach, it goes at such a rate that many children are left with gaps in their knowledge. And some are able to sort of access intervention to sort of try and fill those, but more often than not, it's not done. And so the children which Lina referred to, older children at secondary school, still have those gaps, and that remains with them for the rest of their life. So if they can't access other various ways of teaching, whether it be through vocabulary, context, morphology, letter patterns, orthography, whatever that might be, we are really putting our primary and secondary children at a huge disadvantage. Not least those who are dyslexic, who have added challenges in terms of mastering the spoken word and therefore developing literacy skills. But it's a huge issue. It's a big issue which seems to be sort of being left under the surface. So, a petition like this is absolutely essential.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Tori. So I'm getting the sense that this is all children then, from what you're saying, and not just our children who are neurodiverse as well then. So thank you for that. And Caroline, Tori referred to your wise words when she was chatting away there. So it might be a good time to bring you in as well to follow on from what Tori's just said. Caroline, you're still on mute. We knew it would happen. I'm just glad it wasn't me today.
Hopefully you can hear me now.
Yeah.
So yes, from our point of view, with a focus on exams, we're seeing increasing number of students needing help with reading, both in the classroom, and then that moves on into exams. And of course, there is technology, there's assistive technology now available in terms of computer readers or reading pens, which can help students with their reading, but we shouldn't have to depend on those, and we wouldn't have to if our early teaching in the early years was focused correctly. And there's some very simple things that, as some of my colleagues have said, teachers don't necessarily have in their toolkit now because of the focus on phonics. And things like onset and rhyme. So I've worked with many children who don't realise that if they can spell sight, they can spell and read sight. They can also spell fight, might, etc. And I'm sure there's sort of 10 different words there, and it's a real revelation to them. I've seen students suddenly realise, wow, yes, I can read 10 words, not just that one. And that's the sort of thing that can only happen really when we've worked out that a student isn't aware of that. And I would stress again the importance of individual teaching or small group teaching. Individuals always best, but small group teaching, because it may not be possible for a teacher in a classroom with 20 or even 30 in some cases children to be able to work out what children are missing. So small group teaching and assessing is absolutely essential.
Brilliant, thanks Caroline. Chris, may I come to you now, sharing your thoughts on what happens if we don't get it right for these children?
Thanks, Donna. I suppose the simple answer to that question is, well, not very much, in so much as we'll stay where we are, which I think we'll all agree is a pretty poor place. I mean, when you think about the wider group of children with special educational needs, you see that only half of those achieve the expected standard of phonics compared to their non-SEND peers. So we're not talking about a small problem, we're talking about a very significant one. I think we need to be, focused on strengthening high quality teaching in order to support that. We need that broad, that inclusive and that creative approach to literacy in primary in particular, but also carrying on into secondary. And when we get to secondary, particularly that shift from Key Stage 2 to 3, we need to have a much more disciplinary or subject-specific approach at Key Stage 3 in order to get kids to be able to access the wider curriculum that they'll be engaged with, and the different approaches that are required in those subjects. And that's very much been the approach that DYT's taken, and it's the sort of focus of our work, working in mainstream schools alongside teachers to get those things right. And of course, where those things don't work, then we should follow up with the evidence-based interventions or the specialist support. But I think if we don't tackle the classroom practice and the high quality teaching, then actually we just won't move forward. And potentially, given the lost learning over COVID and so on, that situation may actually be getting worse.
Thank you, Chris. Very serious then, isn't it? It really is. Lynn, what would you like to add to everything everybody said so far?
Well, I think it's very important that we recognize what happens to these young people's self-esteem. They know when they're not achieving. And when they've left Key Stage 1 unable to read well enough, there's very little that's put in place to help support them to develop their reading until they go on to their next level of education, where they're at an even greater disadvantage. And with that level of poor self-worth, it's very difficult for them to engage properly. And then you have all sorts of other problems, but it's not right for us to put children in a position where they're going to feel so badly about themselves when there are things that can be done to help them achieve and to move them forward. And once they have fallen so far behind.
Lynn, we've lost you. Let me just make sure that we...
Sorry, I pressed the
okay.
bar, but I didn't mean to. I say, once they haven't reached that level to be able to access their curriculum appropriately in secondary school, it's very, very much more difficult for them to catch up.
So it's sounding like we're really passionate about early intervention and so on as well. So Anna, it's awkward sometimes coming last after the experts, because everybody's probably said what you wanted, but that's still really interested in what you're going to say and your colleagues at Dyslexia Action. So where are you guys at in terms of, if we don't get it right, where will that leave us?
I think Lynn mentioned a key word for me, and that's engagement. And I think if we engage children at a young age and we capture them early and engage them in learning, engagement's like a sort of magic dust for me. It's like if you can engage kids at a young age, then even though they're finding things tricky, and you make it less tricky for them with all the things that we should have in our toolkit, then the outlook for those children is so much brighter, because they become they become able to sort of engage in metacognition, and they learn how to think for themselves if they have that will to do so. And I think that happens when they're very young. And the worrying part of that is if they become so disengaged with this sort of overdose of phonics where it's not working. I think that's where disengagement leads to all sorts of things that others have mentioned, you know. And yeah, so I would feel like it's engagement early on for me that's key.
Brilliant, thanks, Anna. So it sounds like it's obviously individual impacts, but also impacts on our society and so on as a whole. So incredibly serious. So thank you, expert. I think you've made it really clear about why this issue is so important and the type of action that we can start to do about it. So as always, time has beaten us. It always feels like we could go and talk for a long while, especially now I'm in a lovely position to listen to you all. But I just want to come to each of you, if that's okay, for some closing words, you know, a closing message to leave with our listeners. So, Lynn, may I start with you this time?
Thank you, Donna. Well, I think you can tell from everything that we have all said, we're all in total agreement that we must do something. And we are doing a tremendous disservice to our young people and emerging adults if we don't address this issue as soon as possible. We know what to do. We have skilled people who can help with supporting these learners. We have training programs which we can make available to teachers in schools to help them understand better what next, and to not feel at such a loss, because I think, as Gillian said, they're very keen to do the right thing. Teachers are most interested in the progress and development and happiness of their students. And we're not being fair to them if we don't give them that understanding so that they can better support them.
Thank you, Lynn. Anna, any closing messages for our listeners?
I think Lynn summed it up really well. I would say phonics is important, but it's not the be all and end all. And research definitely backs that up. And there's so many more exciting methods that we could ask our teachers to use. It seems a shame to not use that resource, really.
Brilliant. Thank you, Anna. And Tori, may I come to you with some closing thoughts?
Yes, sorry, I was just trying to switch my mouse there. Yes, supporting what my colleagues have just said. Please, could everyone sign this petition? It's really, really important, because we are not just relying on, we shouldn't just rely on an SSP approach to teaching people to learn to read. We need a research-based, varied approach, which we do have. As Lynn says, we have the tools there, we have the people there, we have the classroom teachers who are wanting to understand and know these methods. So please, 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 it's really important that people sign the petition and that we get our voice heard.
Thank you, Tori. Caroline, closing thoughts.
I would just reiterate again what my colleagues have said, that our students need to consider themselves readers. I think that's a real key, that very often students who fail to learn to read with the scattergun or just phonics approach envisage themselves, they picture themselves as non-readers. And what we need to do is to give their teachers and then give the students a range of strategies to read so that they can consider themselves readers. They find that when they go to a book, they can read it rather than they're non-readers.
Brilliant. Thanks, Caroline. Chris.
Yeah, I can't obviously add anything to the wisdom of everyone else. I mean, I suppose what I would say is that, just as a reminder, that when a child does not progress in the expected way, particularly if they're using a program like SSP, that teachers notice and they adjust, and that they don't just continue that child on that same approach or that same program or that same intervention week after month after term, that they do something different, that they try other approaches, and as people have already said, and as I was saying earlier, to make sure we have a broad and balanced and inclusive approach to literacy all the way through school.
Brilliant. Thank you, Chris. And Gillian, final words to you as BDA CEO.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. yes, reading is communication. We need it to access life. So my shout out is to the government. You've created a reading framework. We've got our initial teacher training, and it doesn't include some of the ways that we have shared with you around teaching children to read. We are here. We're willing to work with you, government. So, you know, do call on us and we will help and share our thoughts and our ideas. But we need to have a broad and balanced approach to the teaching of reading if we want to have all children accessing that form of communication.
Brilliant. Thank you, Gillian. And what a shout out, because we really have got the superhero organisations of the dyslexia world here. Never have I had a conversation with so many eminent people on a Teams. Thank you so much. And yes, on a more serious note, thank you, colleagues, for joining us here at the British Dyslexia Association for this important conversation. It is way more powerful when we stand together, so it's always brilliant to work in these ways. If, for those people who are listening to this broadcast, these issues do impact on you and your family, please do keep in touch with us, of course, here at the British Dyslexia Association, but we also have our colleagues across Patos, Dyslexia Action, Communicate Ed, Helen Arkell and Driver Youth Trust as well. And, you know, this really matters to us all, doesn't it, everyone? So thank you so much for giving up your precious time. And all we say to everybody is, let's keep talking and please do keep in touch. So thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Donna, and everybody sign this petition.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Thanks, Donna.
Thank you.